Okay, so I've seen actually a post on the r slash Reddit Hunger Games subreddit, which is saying that somebody has read the Hunger Games like, I don't know, 9 years ago, and this is how much I remember about all three books. Well, I too have read the Hunger Games when I was 16, which was 10 years ago, pretty much. If not a bit more than that, yeah. Okay, I'll say it is. Yeah, actually, before I even properly started the 10th grade, so I was like early age 16, not later age 16. So, yes, and then here's what I've only read each book once. I've briefly reread a few parts of The Hunger Games like a few months ago, and then that book went missing from my house completely. And I've watched the movies many times. The first Hunger Games movie, I don't really like it. But Catching Fire is actually my favorite movie. And Mockingjay Part 1 and 2, I've seen them both at least two or three times. So, but then again, I'm going to just tell you how much I recall of the Hunger Games book series, right? That includes, yeah. So, in the start of the Hunger Games, Katniss is woken up with her sister Prim not next to her. She says that they're really poor. She did mention that, for example, if they want to have a warm bath, they have to boil water separately and then add it to their bath water. They don't have hot showers or anything like that. That's one thing I remember. The next thing I remember is that, yes, her and her mother and her sister Prim look out of place because they're from a small merchant class, and that merchant class all has the same blonde hair and blue eyes, and that her and Gale, they could be cousins, but they're not cousins, at least not closely, right? But they both have the same black hair, olive skin, and great eyes. As a matter of fact, everybody in the team has the same freaking combination of black hair, olive skin, and gray eyes. And I personally suspect it's the Hunger Games itself that tells her this is not a normal thing anywhere else, which is not. It's really not. It's not common anywhere I know. I mean, I know there's some like Bollywood actors with that combo, but their children don't have it. So yeah, right. Another thing I remember is that yeah, she goes hunting. The hunting is illegal. She has multiple bows and arrows hidden throughout the woods. Her hunting partner is Gale. I do remember that Gale was already 6 feet tall when he was 14, and Katniss was really small. Okay, in size, that is, and I mean she was only 2 years younger, but she was way smaller in size. And another thing I remember is that, hmm, yes, Katniss being named after the root plant. This part I remember. Primrose, of course, is also after a plant. Her mother and father's names were never mentioned. I think here is where she mentioned the fact that her father had died in a mining accident. Okay. And yeah, this part I remember. This part I remember. They discussed out in the woods. I know that the deer that Katniss missed, that was a movie only detail, frankly speaking. In the book, it said that it took several years, some years for them to become friends, right? Properly. And when I reread the book a few months ago, I remember this really snarky, like, to be honest, Gale was very obviously crushing on Katniss. He wasn't even being subtle. It's just Katniss who was kind of autistic or had some traits. She couldn't pick up on hints. But he wasn't being subtle. He was speaking of course, you have children if they were outside of the place of District 12, and so on, right? And this conversation that they had in the movie, that was also in the book, right? Gale's name was in there 42 times, and Katniss's was in there 20 times. Okay. And the reason they were in there was because I took Tezzeret. But when I reread the book, I remember that Tezzeret was actually mentioned when she was talking about Madge and her privilege, as in she didn't need to take Tezzeret. I remember Madge's father, the mayor, is a tall man, but other than that, and this too was during the reread, honestly speaking. And they both are partners in school. This was during the reread a few months ago, right? But that is mostly because neither of them talk out loud much. Okay. Hmm. The Avox girl, that's mentioned much later. Then I remember they go to the reaping. Okay. So they go to the reaping, and almost immediately Primrose Everdeen is picked up. Katniss volunteers for Prim, and she says, family bonds only go so far in the reaping trade. This is something I remember reading 10 years back, right? What I did, which was unusual. Okay. This is a part I remember reading years and years back. It's not in the movie. So yeah, she goes up, and Prim, of course, screams for her not to do this, right? And then he calls Effie calls a name, and she calls Peter Malark, this medium height, stocky built guy. which means that Josh Hutcherson's version of PETA is pretty close on. I mean, back then and even now, I was like really into bodybuilding, really into physique. So if someone is medium height and Gail was 6 feet plus, even at 14 years old, this part I remember this stuff really, really well. So yeah, and then medium height's 5'9" in modern America. I do imagine most of 12 is stunted. Oh yes. Here's a small detail. Remember, in between the start and the reaping scene, Katniss mentions when somebody dies of starvation, very obvious of starvation in District 12. The government never officially puts starvation as their cause of death. They always put up an excuse. I've never heard anyone in the the subreddits, or any fan spaces talking about this little detail. The government always covering up instances of people dying of starvation in District 12. Okay. This part I've never heard, actually. Katniss also was dreading the time when Gale would go into the mines. This part I only remember from the reread. Okay, so Peter was this. I think this is where Katniss recalls the bread story. We know this story. Katniss was 12. She was on the brink of starvation, or almost 12, right? Peeta tosses her the bread that was half burnt that he was supposed to give to the pigs. His mother beats him for it. She doesn't know why this happened. Oh, yes. This part I remember. Book only. Peeta immediately started crying after the reaping, and Katniss thought that Peeta was thinking up some sort of strategy in order to fool everyone into thinking he's weak. But Katniss is like, who's he trying to fool? He looks muscular and strong and everything. Gonna take a lot of crying to convince everyone that he's weak. I mean, we had somebody that pretended to be weak a few years ago. Joanna Mason. Turned out she could kill viciously. This is where Joanna Mason was first mentioned in the Hunger Games series, in the very first book. Matter of fact, this is also where Lucy Gray Baird was mentioned, because, if I remember, yes. Right in between Katniss and Peeta's reaping, right before Peeta's reaping, if I remember this right, Haymitch, who was a paunchy middle-aged man, he stumbled onto the stage, he hugged Effie, and then he fell down. Because he was very, very drunk. Haymitch is drunk, as usual, very. Something like that is what Katniss said. The mayor, this was right after the mayor introduced him as the only surviving victor of 12. He said 12 has only had 2 victors, and of those, only one is still alive today. The first victor was, of course, much, much later revealed to be Lucy Gray Baird, but I do remember very clearly the book saying that 12 had a victor before then, because this is in a lot of fanfics about Haymitch as well, before Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes came out, so this part is memorable. Okay? So Katniss still thinks that Peeta is trying some strategy to try and kill her. Try to fool everybody into thinking he's weak when he's obviously really strong. So they go onto the train, and this is the first time that Katniss is exposed to, like, plentiful amounts of food. Right? And this is the first time she tries to talk to Haymitch. In the book, he's like, just looks at her angry and like, here's some advice, stay alive. I recalled him saying this in like a really hostile tone of voice. Okay. So the plentiful food is there. And yes, this part is in the book, and I think the reason they didn't include it in the movie is because, well, eating scenes are hard to do. This could interfere with her exercise, but Katniss in the book is skinny, she's really lean, right? She's trying to bulk up because that's a tactical advantage. Jennifer Lawrence has to stay skinny to stay looking like Katniss, because I know very well that if you're previously skinny, gaining weight if you've never been heavy before is very, very difficult. So yeah, she tries to eat as much as possible during the whole train voyage. Even Peeta says this. In the reread, I remember Peeta was saying this as well for staying power. Okay? So they make it to the capital. Their escort is Effie, of course. They make it to the capital, and here Katniss herself remembers that Districts 1, 2, and 4 are careers. Obviously, it's not Haymitch reminding them. He doesn't need to remind her of that much stuff. I mean, she has been watching, if I remember. I don't know where it said, but the Hunger Games are required to be watched for every single citizen of Panem every single year, so she's been watching them since she was very young. Okay. So, that's the thing. Right? And then, yeah. Yes, this part I remember. Venia, Octavia, and Fabius. Venia is her hairstylist that she gets introduced to. Octavia is her nail salon person or whatever that is. Or nails person. And Fabius is her skin treatment person. Okay, that's 2 women and 1 man. And they both have very, very strange fashion choices, which is very common in the capital. In the capital, I remember in the books, obviously the plastic surgery was very, very common. Obviously, they couldn't translate that to a movie because it's really expensive to have so many people with plastic surgery and so many people to get plastic surgery and so many people CGI'd with plastic surgery and have them all just be extras or just there for a few seconds. Obviously, that's not even Hollywood budget could cover that. Obviously. So yeah. So those three are the ones just doing her skin, hair, and nails. She's stripped naked, but according to her, I remember this very clearly. They look so unlike people that I don't even. It doesn't faze me. It feels like birds are snipping at my skin. Pretty much. Right? Oh yes, I remember. She was waxed, and then she was bathed down, and then she was applied on this cream that seemed to peel off the outer layer of her skin, and then she was put in this like vile bath, this really stinky bath, and then she was put, covered up with lotion. This would make her look completely hairless, and Flavius actually said, "Oh, now you're starting to look like a human being." This part I remember, and I've never reread this part of the book. It's not in the movie. It wasn't any of the fanfics. This part I remember. Then, yeah, she was introduced as Cinna, her hairstylist. Sorry, her clothing stylist, right? Cinna was her stylist, and Portia was Peeta's stylist, and they both had the same outfit. Now, I remember Cinna was standing out because he was not as cosmetically altered as almost everyone else in the capital. He just had darkish skin and flecks of gold under his eyes. Under his eyes, it really brought out the gold in his eyes. So I think the casting for him in the movie was actually quite perfect, honestly speaking. Not even casting, they actually directly hired Lenny Kravitz. I remember this detail, right? So Cinna says that he specifically requested to stylize District 12, right? And this is where Katniss remembers that in the 73rd Hunger Games, the District 12 tributes were... I've reread this part, but I remembered it from before. Were naked and covered in coal dust. And she thinks she's going to be naked covered in coal dust. And then some years before that, they would wear skimpy coal outfits. I guess they were like bikinis with a coal mining hat. And then she says, of course, that's because... before that she said, it's because the coal mining outfits are really overdone. As we see, Magno Stift and that stylist and Sunrise Under Reaping obviously dressed them in coal mining outfits. That probably is what she's referring to. Because she does remember, this one she does remember, there are replays of many decades of previous Hunger Games coming on TV quite often. Okay. So here she remembers that. Then what else do I remember? Okay, so about being stylized. She recalls a thing about the naked tributes of District 12 last year, right? But this year there's a flame. Oh yes, this year I remember she was in the chariot. She was holding onto Peeta's hand, and she said, "I was almost about to fall out. Good thing I have Peeta here. He's as steady as a rock." She recalls that the other tributes of the other districts were looking away from each other as if the other tribute didn't even exist. Maybe not straight away, because but we're looking like in different directions like the other tribute didn't exist. They stood out by holding hands. Even in the parade, they stood out by holding hands. This part I remember, right? And her dress is on fire. Then after this, she starts training, okay? And here I remember very clearly, do not show your strengths right away. Instead, practice stuff you're not used to. Learn how to do something and also swing a mace. I think she specifically told Katniss to actually learn mace swinging in those 3 days, right? So Katniss is still eating really well because she's trying to gain as much weight as possible. And she's practicing different things. I remember that, she went to different stations. She says, most of the tributes, this is where I remember, and this is how I estimated the tribute size, right? She is smaller than most of the tribute. She's shorter than half the girls, almost all the guys, and though I'm thin, I am strong. I do have a healthy appearance because I'm only naturally small, and most of these people, I can tell they've not been fed properly for years, and most of them have sunken in. And this is where I think Katniss is probably like 5'1" or 5'2" in the book. Okay. And if she's 5'2" and 5'1", the heaviest you can be at 5'2" and still look skinny is 100 pounds, or 95 pounds at 5'1". So, and then there's a pretty small window of possible body weights, right? Because if she's below 90 pounds, she's not going to be strong enough to draw a bow and arrow and climb and all that, even when she's not been eating for a few days. But if she's more than 100 pounds, she's not going to look skinny like she says she is. So she's probably between 90 to 100 pounds. She doesn't actually say this. Okay. So if she is 98 pounds, then the careers, these tributes must have 60 to 100 pounds on me. The tributes from 1, 2, and 4. So both the boy and girl from 1, boy and girl from 2, and boy and girl from 4. right? I must be 60 pounds wider than the smallest career. So the smallest career, therefore, who might be almost definitely, almost probably just because of biology, is probably one of the three girls, 155 to 160 pounds. And then they look at 155 to 160 pounds. It's possible the smallest career girl was actually a bit heavier than 160 pounds, but she didn't look for sure heavier than that. That's possible. So this part I remember. Oh yes, in the training, she actually sees the careers, you know, training with weapons they've obviously trained with before, and she assumes that they're trying to intimidate the other tributes who are basically for their first time learning how to hold a knife or swing an axe. This part I remember her saying very clearly in her own point of view because it's all from her point of view, right? And then yeah, obviously her with Rue, right? This here with Rue, in the movie it's in the interview, but here it's in the training itself, she sees that Rue, of course she's the smallest, youngest, and like her sister, right? Oh, yes, 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 the reaping. On the train with PETA, I just recalled, she saw the replay of the reaping of different districts, and I did reread this. I'm remembering from 10 years ago. Seeing the replay of the reaping, that's in the book only. That wasn't even detailed in any fanfic. But she said, a monstrous boy from District 2 lunges forward to volunteer. A girl with unusually fox face like features from District 5. A boy with a crippled foot from District 12. And a girl from District 11 who's really small, looks almost like a mirror image of Rue, except with dark skin. She actually noticed that Rue and Prim look similar from their reaping, which is why people on Reddit were like, no, 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 Rue only looks similar to Prim because of her mannerisms and blah, 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 blah. No, no, no. I do think they at least look facially similar somehow, right? Just a different color and different, obviously, hair texture. But I'm pretty sure that they look facially similar, posture similar, because otherwise how is Katniss supposed to, note them looking similar even in her reaping? Unless it's some sort of oversight from the author. Okay. So, there's that. Great. So yeah, Rue was able to hit the target every single time with the swing shot. This part I remember. But she didn't show off her most impressive skill, which is being able to jump from tree branch to tree branch. Now, I'm gonna skip ahead to, I do believe that the Jason stealing and then Rue actually stole Kato's knife, that was a movie-only detail. I don't think that was in the book. I really don't. Right? I'm gonna skip to the interviews, okay? Oh yeah, the scoring. The scoring was a really legendary scene. I remember exactly how it went down in the book. So Katniss obviously picks up the bow and arrow, and she notes that the bow has a different feel to it. The arrows are straighter and stiffer than at home, which would imply a higher draw weight because that is arrow spine. But it also could be a shorter draw weight. She's a relatively short girl, so maybe she's not drawing it. Maybe that was made for a career. Who knows, right? But she misses the target by a couple inches. But then she actually shot several different shots to get a feel for the bow in the book. After which she shot a dummy, a knife throwing dummy, and then she shot down the punching bag so it fell on the ground and broke open. Right? So she shot down the punching bag, and then she saw that some of the game makers were nodding in approval, but most of them were looking toward the pig. Then she shot the pig out of the apple out of the pig's mouth, and one game maker whose name was whose reader would be able to be Plutarch, fell into a bowl of punch drink, right? And the others were like really startled. Okay. So yeah, I don't actually remember reading about her lamenting that they'd kill her family, but I do very clearly remember her saying, when they give me my score, maybe a 3 or a 4, they would have taken their revenge on me. I remember that she expected actually a low score because of ticking off the game makers. Then, of course, their scores came out. PETA got an 8 and Katniss got an 11. And the careers naturally score between the 8 to 10 range. In fact, I remember in Catching Fire 2, even the veteran careers only scored between 8 to 10 range. And then in her interview, of course, I remember Katniss saying, I think it's a first, when she's asked about her training score. So this is where I wondered, because she didn't say that this training score of 11 is unachievable, but I thought it didn't happen like multiple years, like once every several years someone scores that. It's not the Reddit warriors who say, no, 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 11 was only impressive because she's from District 12. Shut up. Shut up. What the fuck is up with you? But yeah, I mean, I don't think it happened every single year, but yeah, something like that. Okay, I mean, maybe somebody else clarified much more recently in a thread that she actually meant this the first time somebody had shot at the game makers, not the first time that somebody had scored an 11. Okay. Although, frankly speaking, both of these seem pretty strong. But then again, she said that one is impossibly low, like it's impossible for a tribute to score that well, and 12 is unachievably high. She didn't say 11 was unachievable, so that was a bit confusing. But yeah, that thing right there, right? So her interview with Caesar Flickerman. Oh yeah, and I remember she recalled the other people's interviews. Right. Glimmer's interview, the very first one to go up. In the movie, she was wearing a pink bra, but in the book, she was actually wearing a golden bra. This part I remember. She was wearing a golden bra in the book. And she looked very, very provocative and very, very beautiful. Obviously. And then the boy from 2 is a ruthless killer. The girl from 5 is sly and elusive. And then she remembers Thresh and Rue's interview. Rue goes up first. And Rue actually got a training score of 7. Which is very impressive for someone who's still only 12 years old. Thresh got a training score of 10. Right? Thresh only spoke in mumbles. Oh yeah, I remember. The boy from 10 is very quiet. The boy from 10 is someone she also noted, even though she never interacted with him in the arena. Yeah. Okay, so her interview with Caesar Fuckerman. Oh yeah, of course, he twirled in a dress, but I mean, this is something I remember more from the movie. Right? Okay, so I mean, and yes, obviously Peter's legendary interview. In the book, and this is what I remember from the reread of the book, right? He actually described the different tributes and compared them to bread from each district. So he had a much better memory of the game than Katniss did, actually. Okay. So there's that. And then, of course, commenting on the showers. I didn't recall this from the book, but since I watched the movies many times and I've reread the book, this part I remember from the reread. Okay. I didn't fully reread the book. I just swapped around like a few parts, honestly. So, yeah. There's that. And of course, this legendary. I don't think winning would help because she's come here with me. In the book, he had a much more embarrassed voice. He didn't like it. She's come here with me, like in the movie. That's Josh Hutcherson acting. That's not how he was in the book. This part I remember, right? And in the book, right, she encounters Peeta, and she basically grabs him and throws him into a bunch of fake glass flowers, makes him bleed, and then Haymitch stops him and said, "He made you look desirable, which in your case can't hurt." These were basically his exact words in both the book and the movie, right? And the interaction with Cinna right before the games, I don't actually remember the exact words from the books particularly, but I remember just from watching the movie many times. And then, yeah, then right here, when she's in the tribute to tube, this part I remember very clearly, without me rereading, that after each games, each arena is turned into a tourist center where they can travel, they can take souvenirs, they can even participate in reenactments. The arenas being turned into tourist centers, this is a part that I remember from the very first read of that book 10 years ago. And I'm just going to make this part 1, reread of the what I recall from the books, right? And as you see, I told you what I recall from the very first read, what I recalled from the reread, what I recalled only from the movie, but not from the book, although I remember it must have been the book. What exactly was the movie only, that too I recall. Right, this I've been detailing you the whole time. I've realized this video is like getting really long, so this is like 24 and a half minutes. And part 2 is going to be about the first part of the game, as in from when the game starts to when they're the top 8. That's what I'm going to tell you next, in the next video. So here's what I recall.